All right, it says live, so I'm going, you know what? We're probably live here. John Lee Dumas, a.k.a. JLD's in the house. What's up, dude?
Sebastian, what's going on, brother? Loving life down here in Puerto Rico. All is well.
How long you been down there?
5 years.
Wow. And prior to that, West Coast, right?
San Diego, which is a spectacular place beauty-wise, but you'll never see me back there tax-wise.
Oh, I think that's becoming the common the common theme with
but people are like finally catching up to me. I did this 5 years ago. I moved to the tax haven of Puerto Rico, the warm Caribbean waters. All these people that thought they were getting over, the state tax by moving to Texas. I mean, yeah, they're not thinking that a wise decision anymore.
So Puerto Rico, I never even thought about Puerto Rico. That's a short flight from, I'm here in Miami, so that's kind of.
Oh man, it's a little puddle jumper from Miami. It's just right here, and our weather's a ton better than Miami's too. Like it gets cold in Miami.
It does. Chilly. I had to grab a light jacket as of late here. So you and I had, we've been connected what seems like forever. I got started around the same time you did way back when, and been following EO on Fire for a minute here. And then we recently connected in virtual real life on Clubhouse of all places. And I guess we'll kick the conversation off with Clubhouse. We're here to talk about your upcoming new book. A lot of hype already. The Common Path to Uncommon Success. How about financial freedom? I didn't see that one coming from, entrepreneur fire, a podcast extraordinaire to, let's talk about financial freedom and what that looks like. So I'm excited to dive into the book here in just a couple of minutes. But let's talk about this whole Clubhouse hype, man. It seems to be, it's clearly where all the cool kids are hanging out. We met. So what are your initial thoughts?
Clubhouse is fantastic. It's a wonderful platform. I've always been an audio only guy myself. I've done 3,000 plus interviews, audio only. Like so many of my guests try to be like, oh, just like flip on your Skype video. And I'm like, I'm not wearing a shirt. I did not even comb my hair today. Like, I'm definitely not wearing pants. Like, I'm not putting my video on. So I've done over 3,000 audio only interviews. And when Clubhouse came out, I was like, that is such an amazing, brilliant platform. And obviously it's just taken off. It's literally on fire. We might be laughing about it in 6 months, like it was, burst into flames, a failure, or in 6 years, it might still be as awesome or better than it is now. Like time will tell, but right now it's a lot of fun.
It really is. And are you seeing any yield from the business side of things at all? Are people hitting you up and saying, hey, listen, I need your help with what you do? Or I want
100%. 100%. I mean, when you get into these rooms where there's 200, 800, I've been in rooms with over 2,000 people in it. And, there's questions that are happening and you're giving really valuable answers and people are tapping on your profile to learn more about you. And, if you have a strategic and well done profile, then, people are following up. And I'm definitely selling a lot of books from the Clubhouse, my Clubhouse time. And I'm definitely getting, more followers on different social media platforms, more visits to the site. So a lot of good things.
So easy to be able to, the social media has always lowered the barrier of entry to be able to connect with people. But Clubhouse, and plus everybody's been stuck at home for X amount of time anyhow, and we've moved to this virtual platform, whether we like it or not. So it's just been really cool to see. Like our buddy Mark Savant says, you just never know who's going to show up in one of these rooms on here. And we've had the pleasure of having you jump in for the past couple of weeks into our Grow Your Past in 2021 conversation that's really started. In fact, that room has motivated me to finally start my own room because I've been doing a lot of collaboration. I think that getting into the beginning in club, very important to get some folks that are in your sandbox already in a similar space and start having conversations. So yeah, having a lot of fun on Saturday morning. So my podcast is all about helping people better understand what people's, how they got to where they're at right now. And I do that by telling their story and just unpacking it from a 30,000 foot perspective. You and I connected probably back in 2011, almost at the very, very beginning. And on Facebook and all the rest of the social media platforms out there. And I've watched things evolve for you. If we can rewind a little bit and go back to the day that you said, you know what, I want to launch a brand called Entrepreneur on Fire, or I want to launch a brand that does X, Y, Z, and here's what we're going to do. When did that all happen?
So in 2011, I was listening to podcasts, like I was consuming them because I thought that they were awesome. It was a platform that just really clicked for me, much like Clubhouse is kind of clicking for myself and a lot of people right now. Back then, podcasting was still kind of this new thing. Again, it had been around for a little while at that point, but on a very kind of techie level, but I was just like, wow, just being able to hear these conversations with successful entrepreneurs, to be like a fly on the wall and to have it be on demand, targeted, and free. I love the fact that all of those three things exist into one platform, which is podcasting. So things really clicked for me back then. And I kind of set off and said, what's something that's missing in this space? And like, that's kind of how I've always approached business opportunities. Like I know what's not missing because everybody's doing it, but what's missing? What is missing? What do I wish existed in the podcasting space that doesn't currently exist? And I really thought about it. I wasn't sure because, I loved podcasts, which is the broad niche. And then I loved the business podcast, which was one niche down. Then I specifically loved the interview business podcast. They were interviewing entrepreneurs. That was like the third niche down. And I kind of looked at that third niche and I was like, well, there's like 6 or 7 podcasts that are doing that right now pretty well, very consistently. So they're all going to be better than me if I launched, what they launched, which is a weekly podcast show interviewing entrepreneurs. I said, how can I differentiate? What do I wish existed that doesn't exist in the world? And I said, well, listen, I'm actually driving to work every day right now. I'm at the gym on the weekends. I wish there was a daily podcast that was waiting for me every single morning when I woke up so I could download a fresh episode and hear an inspiring story from a successful entrepreneur. But I want to hear their failures and their successes and their wins and their losses and their tactics and their strategies. And, some shows deliver that sporadically, but I wanted to know that each show is going to deliver on those things every single interview, every single day. And so I said, hey, why not follow Gandhi's advice and be the change you want to see in the world? And that's when I decided to launch the first daily podcast interviewing entrepreneurs on fire. And Sebastian, the day that I launched in September of 2012, it was the best daily podcast interviewing entrepreneurs. It was the worst daily podcast interviewing entrepreneurs. It was the only daily podcast interviewing entrepreneurs. Like I was the only, and like learn from that. Like, how can you be the only? Like that's an amazing way to get initial momentum, traction, and to get, a victory and to get a win and to keep going and building off of that. And then as you and I are talking here now, I'm entering my 9th year with this podcast, 3,000 plus episodes, 100 million listens, 1.4 million listens every month, and over $20 million in revenue generated since 2012. So it's been quite a journey.
Sounds like it. My goodness. So I got to say,
did I mention I get to keep all that money that I make now because I live in Puerto Rico?
I see what you did there. So yeah, you've been a tremendous inspiration for, I think when I started out in 2010, it was just this general premise of helping people with social media in general. And I quickly learned that I don't want to do that. I don't want to manage your Facebook page. And as I started to develop my personal brand as a speaker and as an MC, I always had a podcast because I grew up in a radio station. My dad was a DJ for 30 years. And I thought, why not have a podcast? So I started a blog talk radio channel and was just consistent with that. And it was some 5 years later that I was finding myself in this space of, I don't know that I want to be labeled the social media guy per se. I'm trying to find my place in this digital world while still remaining in it. And somebody said, hey, you've always had a podcast. And I think it was one of those conversations where people think that any piece of content is a podcast, but why don't you create a system that helps people better understand or teaches them how to actually start a podcast? I mean, you're a podcaster already, aren't you? And I'm like, yeah, I'm kind of an inconsistent podcaster, just another piece of content on there. But as I started to look at examples like yourself, where you've been able to really get into not only the entrepreneur niche, but saying, hey, podcasting is a phenomenal platform to be able to do it. And what decision to really go all in with that and just make it a full-time business as a podcaster and also helping people make their podcasting dreams a reality. There was a tremendous amount of fulfillment with being it, because I think that the digital world, and correct me if I'm wrong, is extremely, there's a lot of noise and there's a lot of busy. And if you really want to figure out what you want to do as far as your brand is concerned and building something, you really need to find a niche within there. It seems like you've done a great job of doing that.
Well, what I will share on that point is most every single person that launches a podcast or launches anything in the online world, they launch it as a weak, pale imitation of somebody else. And what I mean by that is they're like, oh, look at what Sebastian's doing. Look at what John's doing. Look at what person X, Y, or Z is doing. They're having success. Let me do that. And the problem with that is they're not going to be as good as those other individuals who have already been doing it for a long time. And nobody wants the second or 10th or 40th best X, Y, or Z. They want the best. So why are you launching a weak, pale imitation of somebody else? It's because you have never sat down and identified your big idea, your zone of fire. And most people die having never identified their big idea, their zone of fire. And it's really sad. And it's really true. And it's really, really sad. And so, what are Sebastian and I doing right now? Well, we're living in our zone of fire. Like, this is what we've been doing now for a decade. And guess what? We're still doing it because we love it and we're good at it. And we've been able to build a life and a business around it. And hey, I'm not saying anybody can't do that, but you can't launch a weak, pale imitation of what's already out there. You need to discover. Well, first off, take one step back. You need to identify that big idea that I'm talking about of yours. You need to be able to live in that zone of fire and then say, okay, within this, I need to discover a niche, an underserved or non-served void in the marketplace that I can be the best solution to. And for those of you that are like, well, I don't want a niche, I'm scared of niching because then I'm not going to be able to serve like as many people as I could otherwise. You're going to fail. Every single time I've seen it, you will fail. You will just blend into the audience and you will blend into the crowd and you will be lost in the ocean and you'll fail. Those people that say, okay, I have a big idea right here, and it's a great idea because everybody, has great ideas. So there's competition up here, which is fine because that's proof of concept. And maybe one day I'll be up here in this playground. But to start, I'm going to find a niche, a void that's not being filled. And I'm going to be the best solution to a real problem in this niche. And those people win every single time because people will beat down a door to you if you have the best solution. They will ignore you if you have the second best solution. And everybody launches the second to 1,000th best solution. Very few people launch the best solution because they're not willing to niche down enough.
I always heard that the riches are in the niches, and it never really made sense. And I thought, well, this whole world of social media is such a broad landscape. How can I found a niche from MC work? Speak very competitive, very saturated. MC world, not so much. Still wanted to be on stage, still wanted to make those connections, still wanted to work. I don't have to work hard at events. When you're on stage for all 3 days versus an hour, you don't have to work so hard to network and make new connections with people. But as far as the business side, when I saw, and I knew that I was going to dive into the podcasting niche when everyone was telling me crazy. People don't even know what podcasts are. No one's looking for a podcast service. No one's looking for help. They're just starting to understand what podcasting is all about. I think you're way too early. Those were all my indicating signs that I'm in the right lane and that I've got to continue to blaze that trail. No, that was 4 years ago. And now is extremely popular, which is mind-boggling to me because it's almost 2 decades old. Regarding your comment about the best version, so in right around the same time when I said I don't want to be swimming in this or treading water in this sea of just digital marketing and just social media in general, I've got to find my place in it. I also was impressed upon the fact that I also have some work to do myself as a human being in order to become who I need to be for the brand that I desire to build and the people that I desire to serve. And I went through this transformational program back in 2016, and I've done a lot of Tony Robbins stuff. And this was one of the most impactful ones because I came out of this and actually launched the podcast Launch Lab. Into a confusion, what's going on with life? Am I starting over again? And then coming out of it, realizing, wow, this is what's on the other side. When they said whatever's on the other side of this thing. But my question to you is, are you aware that people need to become who they need to be in order to launch a successful brand and serve people at their best capacity? Because I'm finding that content can in fact be a crutch at times for people. And that camera or that microphone can be a shield to hide behind without being able to say, hey, maybe this isn't the best version of who I can be. I know that's a little long-winded, but I'm going somewhere with this because I want to talk about your picture with Twins and your.
Maybe just a little long-winded, so I'm going to have to ask for a clarifying question.
Fair enough. So do people need to become who they need to be in order to build a successful brand? Really go in, do the inner work on themselves, becoming the best version of themselves to serve people at the best capacity?
So I would hesitate by saying doing the inner work because that kind of sounds like a lot of work. And I don't necessarily think a lot of people need to do a lot of work, a lot of inner work. What I think people need to do is to just take a deep breath, to sit down and to say, "Hey, let me just actually go through a process of identifying a big idea that I resonate with, that I want to go all in with." And it's not that hard of a process. In fact, it's chapter 1 of my book, Identify Your Big Idea. Like I take you through an exercise that is mind achingly simple. But again, most people will die never identifying their big idea, which is crazy to me when it's literally this simple to identify your big idea and to at least know it. I'm not saying you have to act upon it immediately, but at least know what a big idea in your life for you looks like. And that's just step one. Like, just sit down and do that. Like, doing all this like inner work and kumbaya stuff and like trying to get over past trauma, whatever. I mean, come on. Everybody's got sob stories. Everybody's got, things that they should cry about and they can cry about and they whine about. Let's just get over that. Let's sit down. Let's identify an idea, a big idea that you have passion about, that you're excited about, that you're enthusiastic about. But then also, and this is the qualifying factor that a lot of people skip, you have expertise in, you have skills in, you have value to add to the world. It's a combination of those things. So many people are just like, I'm going to do what I'm passionate about. Okay, that's a hobby that nobody's going to care about. Like, good for you that you have a hobby. I'm not saying hobbies are bad, but when it's just your passion and excitement, that's a hobby. If you want to make this a big idea, you have to also have value, skills, and expertise with that passion, excitement, and enthusiasm combined. That's the zone of fire right here in my fist that I'm making. That's the combination of those things. That's where your big idea is. And then once you have that big idea, again, you're not over, you're not done. That is step 1 of the 17-step roadmap I've created for you. And so, of course, people fail when they come up with their big idea and just start doing the thing because they're missing 16 unbelievably critical steps. So, step 1, identify your big idea. Step 2, discover the niche within that big idea that actually makes sense and is actually going to work for you. And then step 3 and beyond, that's the roadmap.
Get some crazy feedback on your mic, of course, right? First time we connect on an interview here, I'm getting like some crazy, I don't know what's going on. Maybe it's StreamYard here. It's getting some.
You sound clear to me.
We're good now. We're good now. You sounded like a space invader for a couple minutes, but that's cool. It added effects to the show.
I love being a space invader.
The other day in Clubhouse, you said that you told everyone in the room that their first episode is going to suck, and I took that advice and told somebody that.
Don't you have a book that's called Podcast Suck?
If you don't have one, absolutely. Absolutely. I sure do. There we go. There's a little lower.
Podcast Suck.
Podcast Suck. You don't have, I get a lot of pushback.
Your 10th podcast is going to suck. When have you ever done something the first time or the 10th time and been good at it? It doesn't happen. It doesn't exist. I mean, you've got to put in the reps. Your first podcast is going to suck. That's okay. My first podcast sucked. It was actually kind of weird. We're talking about this right now because I don't know how this happened. It was like some blip in the iTunes universe, but like I opened up iTunes today and it just automatically started playing episode 1 of Entrepreneurs on Fire, which I haven't heard, I promise you, in 9 years.
Wow.
It's so bad, like so cringe-worthy bad. I couldn't stop listening to it though. It was like watching my own car crash happen over and over and over again. I just couldn't turn away. Oh man, it was so funny.
I do that too on my old content and think, wow, we've come a long way. I think that's important though, John. I think it's really important to look back and say, hey, listen, that was then, this is now. And to be able to pat yourself on the back and say, you know what, gosh darn it, I'm awesome. So speaking of this book, how'd this whole thing come about with deciding to help people better understand what it means to actually arrive at financial freedom?
So listen, I've been running a multi-million-dollar business now for 8 years in a row. And we're talking net profit, like money in the bank. So I've learned a lot over the years, but not only that, like I've interviewed 3,000 successful entrepreneurs and I've learned from every single one of them. Like that's why I have a successful business, because I've been the mentee to their mentorship for all of these years, these thousands and thousands of hours. And so because of my business success, I have a lot of people reaching out to me every single day, like an overwhelmingly amount at times, asking me essentially the same 10 questions. they're all variations of the same 10 questions. And I can't sit here and like answer individual emails and messages, to that person's specific little situation in life, when the reality is this: they have not even started on their roadmap to financial freedom and fulfillment. They are either like 10 steps ahead of themselves or just like 10 steps behind. Like they don't even know where to start. And there are just the very clear, simple answers to every single one of these questions. And it's now in this book. And so I never had anything to hand to people and to say, this is the answer to your question. It's start at step 1 and go through to step 17, and you will achieve your version of uncommon success. You will achieve financial freedom and fulfillment. And oh, by the way, Sebastian, and I mean this, if people buy this book and they go through those 17 steps and they apply the principles, and after 3 to 6 months, they're not finding some version of uncommon success, they need to think about giving up, because entrepreneurship is not for everybody. And the 37th employee at Facebook is a lot more successful than you or I are financially right now. They're crushing it. You might need to be a number 2 or a number 10 at some company, and that might be a much better, happier life for you. But if you think you're an entrepreneur, this 17-step roadmap is going to get you to financial freedom and fulfillment. If you think you are an entrepreneur, this book is going to show you that maybe you're not quickly. And guess what? That's a good thing too, because now you can go off and do something you should actually be doing. And you can stop that little, voice in your head that's like, well, maybe I could be the successful entrepreneur with lifestyle freedom and da, da, da. Maybe you can, and you'll crush it if you're supposed to, and you can do it. This book gives you the tools to do it. If you can't, let's find out now. Look, don't find out in 10 years from now. Don't waste your time. You will know definitively 6 months from today of reading this book, whether you have it or not.
If that doesn't sell you on the idea that you need to pick up a copy of this book, there's probably nothing else is going to, because I think that's all those desire, either to pursue our entrepreneur dreams and validate them. But I also think there's a fine line between optimism and delusion. The common success, a roadmap to financial freedom and fulfillment, is JLD's brand new book. Don't worry about going to search for it and look for it right now. A link to the book will be provided in the comments on this live stream right now, but also, most importantly, in notes on this episode. So if you're driving, you're trying to, I need a pen, I need to write this down, I need to write, it's all in the show notes. Don't stress. You'll be able to connect with John as well. Let's talk about giving up for a second. I tried to do it several times in the past 10 years, and it just doesn't work, John. I've tried everything in my power to give up. I've stopped.
Why would you try to give up?
Because it gets too hard, and I have a dear friend of mine that tells me every day, Sebastian, going to the gym is hard. Being overweight is hard. Choose your hard. So I quit, and that's where I got into the personal development woo-woo stuff, if you will, and able to take a closer look at, why do I want to run? Why do I want to bail? Why do I want to quit? I never wanted to quit. I was pursuing things that didn't make sense and like you said, you need to evaluate. And if something's not working, you need to bail on it. So I think it was a series of, but I got to a point where, I'll just quit. And then I thought, well, then I want to go. And I just found myself that, quitting specific projects. Yes. Giving up in general as an entrepreneur, I just don't have it in me. But let's talk about that for a second.
I'll keep going off of your comment about choosing your hard, because it's true. Because guess what? It is hard to become a successful entrepreneur. It is hard work. This 17-step roadmap, listen, this is a common path to uncommon success. It's not a hidden path. It's not a secret path. It's not a complicated path. It is a common path. It's what 3,000 plus entrepreneurs, including myself, have trod upon to achieve the levels of uncommon success that we've achieved. But there is a common denominator in this common path. It's hard work. Hard work is one of those common denominators. So it is hard to become uncommonly successful. But guess what? It's also hard to be broke. It's also hard to struggle every single day, with everything in life, with your fitness, with your weight, with your finances, with your relationships. So, just like those words that Sebastian said, it's time to choose your hard. I chose my hard back in 2012 because my life was hard at that time. It was hard feeling every day like I was a failure, and feeling like every day that like I was not living a relevant life. That was hard. It was also hard launching Entrepreneurs on Fire, but I chose that hard. And that was a hard that I grew to love, because of the alternative it was the best hard that I could choose. And that's the process. So guess what? Reading this book is hard because there's a lot of exercises. There's a lot of deep thinking principles. There's a lot of work in these 273 pages. And if you're not willing to put in the work, then I don't know why you're listening to the show. So I doubt anybody that's hearing my voice feels that way. But if you are willing to put in the work, like this book is here for you, and it's hard work, and it will teach you these 17 foundational principles, the 17-step roadmap to financial freedom and fulfillment. And
A lot of steps. 17.
17 steps.
How'd you come up with 17? Was that just your process once you unpacked it?
No, it was like, listen, I boiled it down. If there was 18, there was 18. If there was 16, there was 16. There just happened to be 17 foundational principles that successful entrepreneurs follow to achieve success. That was it. Ended up being 17 very, very common steps. And if you're willing to put in the work, it's going to be hard, but you can choose your hard. And if you choose common path and common success, it'll get you there. And by the way, just like we mentioned earlier, if it doesn't get you there, at least you know. At least you know now in 2021, not in 2030, with all the wasted opportunity between now and then.
I was going to ask you my next question, but you already answered it. Would have been, what's the biggest mistake most entrepreneurs make? And it's staying in it too long and realizing this isn't working and I need to figure out an alternative to either my entrepreneur path or go get a job. So
real quick though, the biggest mistake that non-entrepreneurs make, like people that weren't meant to be entrepreneurs that think they might be able to be, but they're really non-entrepreneurs, is staying in it too long. If you're really an entrepreneur, it's just a matter of when, if you're willing to keep swinging the bat and keep trying and keep taking action, consistent action. That's the key.
I agree. I see your profile pictures with the one and only Mr. Tony Robbins. What's that all about? Are you a Tony fan, or were you over there and saw a bunch of marketers over there at some point in 2019 too? I'm not sure if you're.
I was one of those marketers. So promoted his course, Knowledge Broker Blueprints, back in 2019. Became one of the top 5 affiliates in the world of that course. And because of that, I won an all expenses paid vacation to Namali, Fiji with 9 other individuals. So myself, 9 people, to include like Jenna Kuchar, Lewis Howes, Nick Unsworth, other just ballers. Got to hang out in a room with Tony for 4 days. Like, it was pretty cool. And I'm actually going now to his house in Florida in 1 month, actually, to do it again, because I came in top 5 once again, second year in a row. And we were supposed to do it in Fiji again. Don't tell Tony, but I'm actually very relieved that I don't have to travel halfway around the world to the same resorts. I'm much happier to jump on a 2-hour plane ride to Palm Beach and hang out at his house, which is amazing. And so looking forward to that in late March.
Tony's the man. It's and I love to see how he adapts with the time. He's been doing this for a minute here with what he does, like only he can do. But as technology continues to evolve, Tony said, "Hey, hold on a second. The days of videotapes are gone. I need to be able to evolve with that." So when I saw that, it must have been incredible to be in that room. But also, I mean, you think of like the ultimate mastermind, right? Fiji with Tony Robbins and 9 other successful peers. What was that like? I mean, you gave us a little bit of an idea, but how did it make you feel when you got there and said, you know what, this is how I'm going to spend the next 4 days?
It was surreal. It was such a beautiful location, although, I live in the Caribbean, so it wasn't like it was too off the charts as far as like this kind of beachy lifestyle, but it was a beautiful resorts, really inspiring people. And, I launched the podcast Entrepreneurs on Fire back in 2012 because I knew the truth of the quote by Jim Rohn, "You're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with." And frankly, my 5 back in 2012 sucked. They weren't bad people. They weren't evil, but they weren't motivating, inspiring. They weren't living life to the fullest. I'll tell you what, that worked by launching the podcast, because I was able to surround myself with the right people doing what you and I are doing right now, interviewing them, talking to them, engaging with them, being with them at conferences, etc. And that was kind of the culmination of it. Like, being in that room was pretty awesome, pretty crazy.
I bet. Talk about a reward for hard work. You look back and say, "Hey, here's where we're." You've had a tremendous amount of success over the past 10 years. So, what does it look like once you arrive now? Here we are, 10 years later, made money, built a successful brand, hanging out with Tony and other ballers in the space on here, living in Puerto Rico. I think you're about to get married to your dream girl. Is that accurate? I saw a picture
I
somewhere.
did propose on Christmas Day.
I did see a picture of that. I did. And very, and speaking of, the other ballers in the space and all that, there was lots of familiar faces popping comments there. So it was really cool. Tony's son, Jarek, lives down in Puerto Rico. He's a huge fan.
Yeah, he just interviewed me on his show. He is on the other side of the islands, but he's here in Puerto Rico.
Loves it down there.
Loves it down here because when you start keeping the money you make, Sebastian, life just changes a little bit.
What an interesting dynamic Jarek is with Tony, though. It's almost like same mannerisms, same height, the whole, but like 10 octaves slower. Like Jarek brings it back a little bit while Pops is still going full throttle. Well, if for some reason you decided to tune into the middle of this episode and you're wondering what in the world we're talking about here, I'm on with the one and only Mr. John Lee Dumas, and we're talking about his brand new book, The Common Path to Uncommon Success. It is 17 steps that you can actually not only just read, but you can go in your life and you're able to find your common path to uncommon success on here. Well, we're almost out of time, and I know you're in podcast day because you told me you do all your podcast in one day, so back to back. But so I appreciate you being able to carve out some time for me and us to have a conversation. Finally, my goodness, I always like to every interview ask. I know I didn't. You're exactly right. They ask, where are you been? I've been friends with you on Facebook. That doesn't mean a whole lot in this day and age, but like in 2012, it did, right? To send a message out and be like, hey, John, I'm Sebastian. But I always like to end each episode when I got a great guest on. Well, all my guests are great, but when I've got an extra special guest in like yourself and say that hypothetically, you and I are in an event. You're in the keynote talk about how to, receive the common path to uncommon success. And I'm the MC for the event. And after we get done, the event wraps and we happen to be networking, hanging out with everybody at the hotel bar. And it's late that evening. And I somehow am able to convince you that the other bar across the way has a karaoke bar and that we should go sing a duet. What song would we sing?
I Got You, Babe by Sonny and Cher.
All right. I'm going to hold you to that. If we ever are in the same building and have a karaoke bar.
You have to be Cher, but I will rock that.
With the wig, I mean, I could use some hair. Wig might not be a bad scenario. D-Man, it's always a pleasure to connect with you. Congrats on the next book. I look forward to reading. Absolutely. And if you're listening to right now thinking, my goodness, I need to get my hands on that, you most definitely can. When does it drop?
March 23rd. But again, don't wait for the book to go live because the bonuses for pre-orders are amazing. I'm shipping all 3 of my journals to your doorstep if you pre-order. So there's 4 other amazing bonuses. This book has been personally endorsed by Gary Vaynerchuk, Seth Godin, Neil Patel, Dory Clark, Erica Mandy, uncommonsuccessbook.com. uncommonsuccessbook.com. You heard it right here. And it's also, that link's available in the show notes, in the comments. We're watching this live stream on here. Don't think about it. Go grab yourself a copy, pre-order a copy. Make sure you leave a review of what your experience was on that. John, it's great to connect with you, brother. I encourage you to keep on rocking. You are an inspiration to individuals like myself and those that are around you. And I'm sure the lives that you continue to impact on a daily basis with exactly what you're doing. You're truly living in your purpose and doing work that matters, that leaves people differently. And it's an absolute privilege to be connected with you. Thanks, brother. Adios.
Amen.